everyone. I'm Thomas Wimes, the president of Santa Barbara Nutrients. I had the chance to sit down with Glenn Frommer for an interview. Glenn is a terrific guy and a very successful businessman. He also has polycystic kidney disease. And in his 40 years of business leadership experience, he was the CEO of multiple companies. And in 2014, he co-founded the venture capital firm Milkbox Partners to invest in startup businesses, including healthcare brands. But as a patient advocate for PKD, Glenn has been intimately involved in the PKD Foundation's Research Grant Committee. And in 2022, he created a PR stunt, if you will, the Ride for PKD, during which he completed a 5,500 mile bicycle ride all the way across the United States from west to east. And during this ride, he raised awareness for the disease. He supported PKD communities around the country. He met with more than 100 PKD researchers, including us at the University of California in Santa Barbara, as well as with our team at Santa Barbara Nutrients. So it was great to have Glenn in town. And during the ride, he also raised over $600,000 for the PKD Foundation's research program. And recently, Glenn also joined the board of Santa Barbara Nutrients. So we're really happy to have him on board and be able to pick his brain. And Glenn has been just full of energy and coming up with great ideas. He's also a long-term user of Keto Citra. Well, let's see what Glenn has to say. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. So Thomas Wimes here, Santa Barbara Nutrients. It's a great pleasure to have Glenn Frommer with us today as a guest. So Glenn Frommer is, I think, a very special person. So we'll go through all the background and why we know each other. So let's start there. First of all, welcome, Glenn. So good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Who's Glenn Frommer? I wonder maybe you could fill us in real quick, what your background is, your career, and so on, so everyone knows who they're listening to.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give you the 60-second version of who I am. Family man, first and foremost. I've been married to my wife, Beth, coming on 39 years. We have 3 grown children, just had our first grandchild about 6 months ago, so great to be surrounded by a big, loving family. I'm a very active adrenaline junkie. I like to stay very active, cycling, hiking, mountain biking, skiing. We live up in the mountains in Colorado, so I try to stay very active and fit. Professionally, I'm a chemical engineer with an MBA in finance. I also have my CPA license, and I practiced many years running businesses for private equity-owned companies. About 15 years ago, I became a venture capital investor, and I do that for a living now, investing in early stage businesses. And lastly, and certainly not least importantly, is I'm a developing philanthropist, if you will, trying to find those causes that appeal to our family very broadly, and trying to help those charities advance their missions.
Good, excellent. So you have a very solid business background and venture capital investment, finance, and so on. Great. And then something happened, somewhat recently, just a few years ago, I think I understand that somehow you found out about your diagnosis of polycystic kidney disease. So I'm assuming that was a surprise, and I was wondering what that experience was like and how you even found out about it.
Yeah, calling it a surprise is an understatement. I had never heard of polycystic kidney disease. I have no family history of it, and came to find out that about 15% of the PKD population fits into the category I am in, where it wasn't genetically inherited from one or both parents, that somehow it's called mosaicism or spontaneous PKD. But because it wasn't in my family, I'd never heard of it. I had an MRI on my back for a completely unrelated back injury, and so the PKD diagnosis really came as a secondary finding of having that MRI. And when I first found out about it, I'll tell you that because I'd never heard of it and because it wasn't affecting me right then and there with any kind of short-term negative health consequences, I silently ignored the condition. I thought, well, I've got it, but I'm sure it won't impact my life. I don't know very much about it anyway. I'm not going to tell my family. I don't want to worry them about it. And I transitioned over probably about a 3 or 4 year period, the last 3 or 4 years, to being much more vocal, vociferous advocate for both myself and the larger PKD community. Because as I dove in and understood more about the genetic causes and the inherited nature of the disease, how many people in America, 600,000 of us in the U.S., around 12 million worldwide, have the disease. And of course, that many people having a disease and me never hearing about it meant that probably others had were in the same situation. I decided to get much more actively engaged in understanding it, understanding the state of research. Unfortunately, no real cures, no real, up until recently, effective treatments, but decided to become much more actively involved. Mm-hmm. And I got involved in the PKD Foundation on their Advocacy Champions Network, which goes to Congress to advocate for more funding into research into our disease, as well as some of the legislation that we want our government to pass, including the Living Donor Protection Act, which many of us who have PKD will end up in kidney failure and need kidney transplants. I also got involved in the Research Grant Committee to help the PKD Foundation direct funding across the many universities who do research into PKD and make sure we can get some of those seed programs funded with hope that it'll ultimately lead to treatments and diseases. I also became very actively involved in creating and completing something called the Ride for PKD throughout the entire year of 2022. I know we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Before we dig into all that,
Yeah.
let me just back up for a second. You said, so you got sort of like the incidental diagnosis, MRI scan for some completely different reason, and somebody told you, oh, by the way, you have polycystic kidney disease. I'm wondering what that was like, and what the next step was. Was there a doctor that says, okay, now you should do this, and here are the options, and this is what you can do, or did they just send you home and say bye-bye, you're on your own, or what was that like?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you ask, because I think my reaction to finding out I had it is not that different from many people in our community who find out they have it, because in my case, it was diagnosed before I started to see a decline in kidney function. That is an increase in creatinine, indicating a decrease in glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. I wasn't feeling that. I had hypertension, but it wasn't that severe. And I thought, well, okay, this is just a disease. I'll probably just have to learn to live with it since there aren't any treatments. And the interesting part is when the radiologist told me that in addition to having a back problem, I also had PKD, there wasn't any information. They didn't really know anything about it either. So they say, hey, you've got cysts on your kidneys. I was like, wow, bummer. But there was no explanation of, hey, this is going to progressively get worse over time. These cysts will continue to grow if you don't make any lifestyle changes. You really should go see a nephrologist. They just told me about it and kind of blew through it. It wasn't for several years until I saw a nephrologist. First nephrologist I saw back on the East Coast didn't have any other PKD patients and knew very little about PKD. In fact, quite frankly, now that I've been sort of in PKD and researching it more, I think I know more today than that nephrologist knew about it 5 or 6 years ago. It was only after I switched to a nephrologist here in Colorado when we moved out here that I started to get really good care. started to have diagnostic tests like MRIs on my kidneys to determine my total kidney volume. I had an MRA to check for aneurysms. I've had other sonograms. I've had lots of blood work. But it wasn't until I found a nephrologist who really knew something about PKD, Charles Edelstein, here at University of Colorado Health, is a very experienced nephrologist in PKD that I started to get good advice and care for the condition.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. I've known Charles for a long time. Clearly, he's an expert in PKD. But that's actually an interesting experience. And I wonder how many other folks are out there that have, got told, oh, you have PKD, and there was not really any follow-up. And for years and years, they're, don't really get seen and treated properly. And they might even have a nephrologist, but even that nephrologist has no other patients with PKD, knows very little about it. So I think that's, to my mind, sort of an important mission to have a referral database, some of this is actually happening. So there are centers of excellence for PKD where patients can actually find those experts, and otherwise it's a little bit tricky. How do you even find out who knows something about it? Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to meet literally hundreds of patients with PKD and have heard their stories. I think there are a couple of problem areas with PKD. Just as you said, Thomas, there are nephrologists who don't know anything about the disease. Obviously, we know PKD impacts people regardless of race or religion or ethnicity or geographic location. So people who live in parts of the country or world that don't have world-class health centers often don't get very good advice. But I think complicating that factor is the fact that PKD is inherited, and because older generations, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who had PKD and died from it, didn't have access in those days to dialysis, certainly to advanced medical techniques and lifestyle changes. Certainly the state of research was much poorer 30, 40, 50 years ago than it is today. They learn from information being passed down from prior generations that there is nothing you can do about PKD, that in fact it's a death sentence. You're born with it. As soon as the cysts grow big enough, your kidneys will fail. You'll go on dialysis. You'll probably die while on dialysis, maybe waiting for a transplant. And so people who have it really have this sense of hopelessness. Hey, if this happened to every generation of my family, it's going to happen to me in exactly the same way. And so I think there's an awareness and an education campaign required to bring up the overall understanding that today, this is not your grandparents' PKD, that we have options for particular lifestyle changes, but also for medications, for better diagnostic testing, for actually participating proactively in our health journey and the benefits we can provide to ourselves by making changes in our lives. And to me, that's a big change that isn't really, in my opinion, well understood by the broader PKD community.
I totally agree. I see this, very, very, very frequently on social media where PKD patients hang out and discuss, and some are still of the opinion that because it's a genetic disease, you can't change your genes. That means there's nothing you can do, which is completely wrong. There's plenty of genetic diseases where there are treatments, ways to manage them, and PKD is no different from that. So, yeah, I totally agree. And that word, I think, should be spread much more. And even patients, unfortunately, are still under that impression. But that's where people come in, like yourself, to actually do big things, big promotional things, PR stunts, if you will, and that's one of the things you've done. So you mentioned already you got connected with the PKD Foundation. I think folks will probably know that's a patient advocacy group. They're round up money for to fund research projects and so on. And so what was that like, and what made you think about raising funds for the PKD Foundation for research? What was the thinking there?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things came together about 3 years ago. One, I became, starting about 5 years ago, more actively engaged in the foundation, started to dive into the state of research and the role that the foundation had in seed funding research. And the statistic that I was hit with as I started to learn more about it was that the PKD Foundation gets somewhere between 60 and 80 proposals, grant requests for funding every year. But because of budget constraints, only funds 6 to 7 of those grant requests. So 90% of these brilliant ideas coming in from all around the world to say, hey, we just need a little seed funding to get this work going, are not being funded. And as a PKD sufferer, I know that only funding 10% of those projects reduces the likelihood that there'll be a treatment or cure during my lifetime. It just takes longer if we're not funding more and more of these projects. So we need more funding. And I started to write checks to the foundation as charitable donations. And then realized, well, I might be able to leverage some of my skill set in fundraising. I'm an avid cyclist. I know a lot of people who care about me. I know a lot of high net worth individuals that I might be able to do something big on behalf of fundraising for the PKD Foundation. And so back in 2021, the idea for a cross-country ride across America, specifically to raise awareness and money on behalf of the research fund at the PKD Foundation was born, and I named it the Ride for PKD. And I put aside all of my other endeavors in business and a lot of personal sacrifice to create this Ride for PKD, to do all the marketing and promotion, to find sponsors for the ride, including Santa Barbara Nutrients, to develop a plan of attack of getting across America. I also wanted to stop at as many research institutes and local chapters of the PKD Foundation to meet researchers, learn the state of the research, what was going on, be able to promote that, and also to meet the community out there and try to build that community and connect people together. And so we started out from San Francisco on May 1st. We finished in Cape Cod, Massachusetts on September 1st of 2022, 4 months on the road, cycling nearly every day, meeting people, raising funds all along the way. And very, very meaningful experience for my family and for myself. My wife, Beth, was incredibly supportive. She was with me every step of the way. She actually drove the RV, which we named the Big Blue Whale, across America to support the journey. And at the end of it, we ended up raising $654,000 for research into PKD, which is the equivalent of 4 $160,000 2-year grants. And I'm really happy to report, because I didn't know how it would actually work out, that money has actually been deployed in the 2023 cycle for making grant proposals from the foundation. And instead of funding 6 grants, there were 10 grants funded for this next 2-year period, partly with respect to the money that was raised from all the very generous donors and sponsors for the Ride for PKD. So, a lot of people, as we said before, will take this diagnosis of PKD and say, hey, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to sit on my couch, wait for the cyst to grow, wait for my kidneys to fail. That's the end of that story. But given my background and my kind of inability to just sit still, really this can-do attitude to help the community, we think that we did something very important for our community. It won't be the last time we do something like this. It won't be every year that I do it for sure, but I feel really good about the contributions that we've made to PKD research.
Right, yeah. During your ride, you stopped by Santa Barbara, which was great. That was actually one of the early stations because you started, I think, in San Francisco, as you said. So it was great to see you come into town on your bike, and we had a really fancy bike riding outfit, printing Ride for PKD on it. We stopped by UCSB. We actually had a really nice meeting with a bunch of my students. And to me, that's actually always important to have the students meet people that have PKD, because I think it makes them work twice as hard. They're already working hard, but they're working even harder if they're knowing what it's for and so on. So feel free to come more often to
Thank you.
get accelerate the research there in that sense. Um, yeah, so that was great, and we actually had a little bike ride together and did a little interview while biking and risking our lives. So we'll probably put the link down there in the description if somebody wants to see that. Um, but how did this work? So you were on the road for 4 months, all the way across America. You were always moving forward on your bicycle, your wife in the bus, and there were other people joining you on different stretches of the ride. Is that right? How did
Correct.
that
Yeah,
work?
yeah. So we actually cycled about 100 days, about 60 miles a day, nearly a 6,000 mile journey across the country. We took 4 months to do it, really because we weren't racing across America as much as we were having the objective to build community and raise awareness and meet with researchers. And there were really two reasons to meet with researchers, just as we did at UCSB. One was to present a real patient with the disease, because so many researchers are working on mouse models or working in petri dishes and don't really see as you said earlier, the impact that this disease has on individuals and on the broader community. So there was a benefit from doing that. The secondary benefit is we were raising money to support research and to be able to report back out to the very generous donors and sponsors who were supporting the ride with the current state of research and the excitement around all the different angles that various universities are taking to try to come up with treatments and ultimately a cure for PKD. It provided those donors with some real world information about where money goes in this disease. So many charities are like black boxes. The money goes in, you're never quite sure where it ends up. I would feel that way about a lot of big charities. They do good work, but everyone's individual dollar contribution, you have no idea where it's going. Where in this case, it was very specific to the donors and sponsors where the money was going. And so every day we moved. We had averaged 60 miles a day, 4+ hours a day on the bike. We were blogging from the road, doing a lot of video and social media posting to build that awareness. As I said as well, we met with lots of different chapters of the PKD Foundation across the country. Sometimes there's just a couple of people who we'd meet with to tell stories and share our enthusiasm and our optimism for our disease. In other places, there were 20, 30, in New York City, more than 50 people who met from the community to support the cause. So really, really meaningful experience both for the community and for our family.
Excellent. Yeah. So that's one big thing you've done, the Ride for PKD, and people can still watch videos that you've taken and shot on the road. So I encourage everyone to look it up, the Ride for PKD. Um, but you're doing other big things as well, and in particular, you sort of I think sounds like you were not very satisfied with the common advice saying, there is not really much you can do for PKD, and there's only one drug available, and it doesn't stop the disease. So you figured, however, out that there are dietary lifestyle interventions. You found us. You found the whole keto approach, keto citra. How did you even find out about all this? You must have done quite some research.
Yeah, well, as part of doing research into the disease and research into the research programs going on behalf of PKD, I became aware of the work that you, Jacob Torres, and other very talented researchers at UCSB have been doing, specifically with regards to dietary interventions and the impact of intermittent fasting, of calorie restriction, on ketosis, on the progression and growth rate of cyst and PKD. And to me, it was a very compelling approach. By the way, the research paper is very well done. I've read a lot of research papers where, every other word I have to look up in a scientific journal, and you're not quite sure whether or not a lot of this is hypothetical, what's known versus what's unknown. The work that was done in your lab, very clear, very compelling, that these dietary interventions in mouse models really work. And so as someone in the community and on behalf of the community looking for hope, looking for something that would likely work in humans, this was very interesting early research. And so I wanted to make sure to get through UCSB and to meet you during the Ride for PKD. And as we got to know one another before the ride, it became clear to me that you leveraged the research to create really the first food product intervention for the treatment of PKD. Certainly that's the way I would assess it. And so even before getting to meet you, I became a customer of Santa Barbara Nutrients, started to take the KetoCitra product. First I said, well, I'll take it, see if I can tolerate it. Tolerability is easy. I mean, it is a delicious tasting, easy to mix morning and evening supplement. I drink it with breakfast and with dinner every day and have for the last couple of years. And said to myself, well, this has the possibility of slowing down cyst growth rates, and it's very tolerable, and it is generally regarded as safe because all the ingredients that are in KetoCitra are GRAS, G-R-A-S, generally regarded as safe, and therefore for me, no downside, all upside, and have really enjoyed taking the product. And so that's how I became aware of Santa Barbara Nutrients and the product KetoCitra.
Excellent, yeah. And I think if I remember right, you even started on KetoCitra during the ride for PKD while bike riding. So I was wondering if how that experience was. I'm assuming it's it's good for hydration. I know I'm taking it myself twice a day as well. I'm slowly sipping, so I know it's actually really good for hydration, which you presumably need a lot of while bike riding across America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we know through the research in PKD, hydration is critical to keeping the kidneys flushed out, preventing crystal and stone formation, preventing cyst sites for cysts to grow on, maintaining overall health. And so not only do the active ingredients in the product help, but also the fact that you're drinking a sufficient amount of liquids. Certainly should be drinking liquids all throughout the day, but at least for those two periods, morning and night, really helps out as well. So it helped out immensely. It's hard, and I know that there are clinical trials ongoing, and so this is anecdotal. I'm an N of one, but I did see through the MRI scans that the year of taking KetoCitra versus the year previous, that my cyst growth rate was cut in half. Now, I can't definitively say that it was 100% attributable to KetoCitra. However, it is interesting to note that that was one of the changes made in the period before and after that reduction in cyst growth rate. And so I'm really hopeful that the clinical trials will prove that out in the majority of people that take the product.
And you said that was based on ultrasounds?
On MRI. I take annual MRIs at UC Health to look at the height-adjusted total kidney volumes. And again, the growth rate, which is still too high, but the growth rate was cut in half.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, I didn't even know that. Okay, great. And yes, I mean, you're right. It's an N of one, but there are many N's of one by now. So we've actually I was just stunned yesterday, or well, a couple of days ago, we put some data together from, and we'll talk about the Renew program in a second, but we put some data together from a pretty large number of patients that did the Renew program, which we're going to talk about. And those patients with pain, to begin of the program, something like over 80% of them experienced reduced pain. A lot of most of them even said greatly reduced pain levels. So I'm assuming you probably didn't have kidney pain type of, because you're kind of still relatively early on, so that you wouldn't have seen a change there, because you start with no pain. But I think at some point, N of one, you add up more and more N's of one, it becomes a big N.
Right.
Anyway, but of course, you're totally right. Controlled trials is now what needs to be done, and we're doing those, of course. Yeah, so that's great. So you started Keto while you were riding, on across America, and we had actually talked at the time, and you decided against doing ketogenic diets because that, as you're just starting a whole across America ride, it's not the right timing for it. But then afterwards, you joined the Renew program, as I remember. And maybe you could tell us about, first of all, what the Renew program is, and what your experience was in it.
Yeah, so the Renew program to me has been a godsend as someone who is proactive about taking care of their general health and then specifically my kidney health. So I learned about the Renew program through my association with you and Santa Barbara Nutrients. The Renew program is, in summary, a ketosis program that is driven and monitored by very, very good dietitian support over a 3-month period to help people in the program both get into and maintain a state of ketosis. And by the way, before I signed up for the program, I knew zero about ketosis. Like most people, confused it with ketoacidosis, which is not the same thing for sure, but knew very little about it other than your research and supporting research by other research institutes demonstrated that a low carb, and in the case of people with kidney disease, low protein, high fat macronutrient balance is a positive when it comes to kidney health and retarding the growth rate of cysts. So I got into the program, and before the program, I had made multiple lifestyle changes after I was diagnosed with PKD. I became a vegetarian. I increased and maintained my water intake. I drink the Keto product, but I actually mix it in a product called the Hydrate Spark. This is a kind of Bluetooth-enabled water bottle that reminds me to drink throughout the day, so I stay hydrated. I don't have to remember that I'm thirsty. It keeps me notified of that. I took on practices for reducing my stress, meditation, etc. Got better sleep. I get consistent health tests, blood work 3 times a year. I get, as I mentioned earlier, annual MRIs. I get an MRA. I take multiple supplements. I take some off-script meds that are indicated in stalling cyst growth. So I'm trying to stay very proactive in the treatment of my PKD. And this program, Renew, was a different angle that was actually not something I came up with, but proven in the lab by you and your colleagues. And I thought, hey, real interesting. And I thought, well, I'll try it for 3 months. Let's see if I can get into ketosis. I don't know that I can. And let's see if I can maintain ketosis. And what I'll tell you is after, a brief, maybe 36-hour period as I was transitioning from a high-carb diet to a high-fat diet, kind of going through a mild bout of what they call the keto flu, my body just kind of transitioned over to using ketones as a primary energy source. And I got into and was able to maintain ketosis as demonstrated by, finger pricks 3 times a day throughout the program, that I was in and maintaining ketosis throughout the program. Never got hungry. Was taking in enough calories. For me, weight loss wasn't a big desire. In fact, it was an undesired outcome. So I increased my overall calories. Again, got 70+% of those calories from fat, and was able to easily maintain a state of ketosis for the entire 3-month duration of the program. There were really some remarkable outcomes from the program, which I didn't expect. That if you're interested, I'd be happy to share with you.
Yeah, that was my next question. What was the outcome? What did you see change, to the better, hopefully, but maybe you had side effects as well?
Well, I would say not really any side effects, no significant negative side effects for sure. I actually, because I do regular blood work, had blood results. I've had years and years of blood results, so I know where all of my levels generally are, what my trends are, and did a blood test in the midst of the Renew program. And remarkably, the blood work came back really good. In a number of areas. One which was surprising to me, and I don't know how other people react to it, but my cholesterol profile stayed remarkably healthy. In fact, my HDL, the good cholesterol levels, went up, and my LDL, the bad cholesterol, went down. And just as a armchair health nut, I would say that probably has a lot to do with the quality of the fats that I was ingesting during the Renew program. High in unsaturated fats, low in trans and saturated fats is probably part of the reason for that. So, I kind of expected that my cholesterol might actually go up, but in fact, it did not. It actually got healthier. My blood pressure, which I take twice a day because I do have hypertension, I didn't change any of my medications, but in fact, on the same level of medications, my blood pressure was 4 to 6 points lower throughout the entire program on both the diastolic and systolic measures, which was a nice side benefit that I didn't expect. And then the most impressive thing to me, actually, from a quantitative perspective, is that my glucose levels, and I've been wearing a continuous glucose monitor for the last 3 years to ensure that I understand my metabolic health, what foods kind of set it off, how I react to stress and exercise and hydration and foods that I eat. My metabolic health was generally good. For the 3 years before the Renew program, I would say that my average glucose runs kind of around 90. But 2 or 3 times per day, I'd get significant spikes as I would have a pasta dish or eat a sandwich or a sub, or have beans or fruit juices. Whatever the high carb meal might be, I'd have that spike, my insulin would kick in, the spike would respond. I have all that data to show, all that noise in the system. In the 3 months that I was on the Renew program, absolutely no spikes. So quantitatively, my glucose levels dropped anywhere between 7 and 10 points on average, from a sort of good level to an even better level. But I didn't have a spike throughout that entire 3-month period over maybe 115. In general, between 100 and 110 every day was the max. So a very even glucose profile over that 3-month period. And that was really an incredible surprise to me, that I never got any spikes and I stayed very consistent. And I know from that, having done 3+ years of glucose measurement, that is the ultimate in metabolic health.
Right, and I can only confirm what you just said, because we had actually, looked at your CGM data together. So CGM, continuous glucose monitor, a little device that usually goes on the upper arm, or wherever you want to put it, and it just keeps sampling your blood glucose levels. And as everyone knows, if you eat a carbohydrate-rich food, your cereal breakfast, the glucose is going to shoot up, and the next thing that's going to shoot up is the insulin level, so which is the meter doesn't measure, but you can infer it. And if somebody's metabolically unhealthy, they have pretty high glucose levels, most of the time anyway, plus, spikes. You started out actually metabolically super healthy, from what I could tell, nice low levels, spikes, of course, because you eat food. But everything went down, rock solid, to really low levels. So, we've been, of course, thinking, you would be a great case study to write a paper on. So that might happen. Which is always great to show an example of, someone who actually went through a program and what happened to them.
And Thomas, just as an aside, I actually now have data because I was traveling for the last week and came off of the Renew program and being ketosis to kind of go back towards a vegetarian, a non-keto based diet. And it's remarkable to see over that 2 week period of the CGM where I was in ketosis, again, very stable. And then as soon as I came out of it, big spikes to the 150s, 160s, regular spikes during the day. So I haven't shared that data with you. I just actually downloaded it. I will send that to you.
Wonderful. Yeah. So that's amazing. Of course, one would expect, and we kind of joked before that, I wish you had been more metabolically unhealthy going into the Renew program, so we would see an even better difference. But of course, plenty of other folks that have been going through the Renew program, they started from very different starting points, and I can only confirm that lots of them have seen like really great improvements. Yeah. So, all right. So the Renew program is, kind of like an online training program, if you will, dietitian-led, supervised. It's probably not for everyone, I would assume. And you have, gone through it. You have the inside story. You have to, commit to a little bit of time, to attend the sessions and learn things. And you probably need time cooking at home and so on. How was that experience for someone who's a busy person like you are?
Yeah, a couple of things here. Maybe if I take one step back about why I'm kind of driven in this area and want to encourage others to be more proactive in managing their own health. Again, whether it's kidney health for PKD or just general health overall. Both of my parents are deceased. My dad died from complications of diabetes. He never took care of himself, didn't respond to the request from his doctors to change his diet and his lifestyle, and over a 10-year period saw a continuous decline in his health to ultimately kidney failure brought on by diabetes. My mom died from colon cancer several years back, misdiagnosed, and by the time she was properly diagnosed, it had metastasized, and she went very quickly. And I think about those, and we all have people in our lives that we know follow the same pattern. And these are preventable, not completely avoidable, but in terms of a timeline, deferrable causes of death. My dad and my mom should still be around today had they taken their health more seriously. And so it's a frustration of mine, and I try to apply it to myself, that people in general don't spend enough time proactively managing their health. They wait to get sick, diagnosis with something, and always want their docs to just prescribe a pill or do a surgery and make me better. But we know that's a slippery slope and ultimately results in premature, certainly unhealthiness and premature death. So I encourage everyone who I love and anyone who I meet to take a very proactive approach to their health. And do whatever you can to live as healthy and as long as you possibly can. I think about my family all the time, being a new grandparent, knowing all the great things that are going to come in the future. I want to be around to see it all, and so I want to live as healthy and as long as I possibly can. So I'm committed to that. Now, for the Renew program, you have to make a commitment. You just don't show up and it happens. You have to get into and then work hard to stay in ketosis. But I will tell you, for 3 months, I got in and stayed in. Ketosis is not that hard to achieve. even as a vegetarian, right? A lot of people think about ketosis and like, oh, I'll have a ribeye steak and bacon and, high fatty meats, and that's all I have to do. Well, I don't have that, let's call it a luxury from a ketosis perspective, but it didn't negatively impact me because there are plenty of non-meat foods that are high in fat and plenty of fat supplements that help one change the macronutrient balance to more fats and less carbohydrates. You have to read labels. I can't say I was aggressive at reading labels of all foods all the time previously, but I can assure you every time I went to the market, the first thing I did was turn something around and read that nutrition label. And even if it says keto on the label, but you look and it's got high carbs and high protein, I put it back on the shelf. It wasn't for me. So it reduces the number of foods that are probably applicable to one's diet, probably to about 20% of all the foods that you could eat. But it's still a decent variety for sure. Then you get through all of the advice from the dietitians in the Renew program, really good advice on what foods to make. There are great recipes that come out both from the dietitians and from the community of people that have been through the Renew program. There are products to buy on the market. One simple one, very easy, is medium chain triglycerides, MCTs. You just pump it out of a big gallon jug into your shakes or your morning coffee, blends in nicely, and you build up the healthy fats in whatever you're consuming. You certainly build a love of things like peanut butter and olive spreads and olive oils and cheeses, which unfortunately I like all those foods. So yeah, definitely it takes a little bit more effort to avoid, almost like any dietary change. It restricts what you can eat. Because I'm a vegetarian, so I already cut out meat. This was just a little bit more restrictive. I'll tell you, through the program, you also learn a lot about oxalate management, which lead to kidney stones, which are very negatively impactful on the kidney health, particularly for PKD sufferers. So great advice from the dietitians about what foods are high in oxalates, which ones to avoid. And, the old adage, what gets measured gets improved. There's a lot of quantitative metrics in the program. So you're measuring weight and blood pressure, your glucose and ketone levels. You're using Chronometer to measure the foods and the macronutrient balance of the foods that you're eating. And to me, that was all fairly easy to do and showed visibly showed through the numbers that progress was being made. So, I found it certainly tolerable to get into ketosis and stay there. Not as hard as I thought it was going to be, and certainly delivered, interesting results around glucose and blood pressure, et cetera.
Excellent, yeah. And just to clarify one thing before everyone gets scared, so the Renew program is actually not vegan or vegetarian. It normally allows for lots of things like fish and cheese and eggs and all these goodies.
Yes.
You just made it hard on yourself by saying I'm a vegetarian. So the more common experience is to do exactly what is a Renew program is all about, which is kind of like plant focused, but not exclusive.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. Most of it is more pescatarian, right? Fatty fishes like salmon and herring and mackerel get added in. And I'm not a vegan. I think, that would be really tough. But cheeses, dairy product, heavy creams, eggs were all part of the program, and certainly something that's part of my diet as well.
Right. Good. Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing this. So now another thing you've done, and maybe the last thing, one of the last things we'll talk about is real briefly. So you've recently actually joined the board of directors of Santa Barbara Nutrients. So thank you for joining, which is really fantastic to have you on board on the team. So, maybe to let everyone know, boards of directors at companies, they have a bit, some like an oversight advisory type of role. You know this way better. You've been on plenty other boards. Maybe you could tell folks what you're trying to, planning to accomplish, what you're planning to focus on and what your role would be on the board.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm very, very excited to have just been announced as a board member and an investor in Santa Barbara Nutrients. As I mentioned in my upfront comments, my career was spent leading companies as CEO. So I've got a lot of experience in all the various aspects of growing and running businesses. And most recently, my career as a venture capital investor, which is investing in early stage businesses. Many businesses have an idea for a product or a service, not much in the way of revenue, but to invest in those companies because they do something good for the end population that they're trying to impact. Whether it's a health product like Keto Citra that Santa Barbara Nutrients makes to help the PKD community and perhaps other communities with diseases, or other health-related startups or disruptive technologies that look to make the world a better place, more efficient, higher productivity, new products, et cetera. So I try to invest in companies like that have a mission to make our planet and our populations better as a result of having these products and services in the marketplace. So when I was introduced, Thomas, to you, we got a chance to know one another, and I recognized the compelling nature of the research that was done in the lab, the product that you've built off of that research, and the go-to-market strategy into a community that I have insight into, given the ride for PKD and my involvement with the PKD Foundation. I thought this is perfect, right? This is a perfect storm of all these factors coming together to encourage me to become more actively engaged. And so very excited to be an investor, and as I said, as a board member. And as a board member and investor, what I hope to bring to the company is, through my 40-year career as an executive, the ability to help with strategy and with governance of the business. I can bring, even though I'm not a nephrologist, I'm not a kidney research expert, I bring enough generic business experience to try to help the business understand, marketing programs, finance programs, structure the business, et cetera, so that we can help as many people in the community as possible. Also, I can be a patient advocate because not only am I an investor in the business, but I use the product. I've been through the Renew program. I can tell people about my experience. And because I have some credibility within the PKD network, hopefully bring other people to also start the program and take the product. I also, as a philanthropist and a fundraiser, would hope to be able to tap my network of, both high net worth people who don't have PKD but are interested in supporting me and the rest of our community in getting products to the market that help our community, but also people in the PKD patient population who know that there are very few options today of supplements or products or lifestyle changes that they can effectively implement in their lives to help slow the cyst growth rates, that can invest in this company and help get the business to commercial success through the period of marketing the product, doing clinical trials to demonstrate efficacy in humans, and then really get the product into the hands of the majority of our community. And so I look to be able to help in all those areas to support the mission of Santa Barbara Nutrients.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. So we're so glad to have you on the team. That's amazing. And soon, I think you'll give a keynote address at the PKD Con, which is the annual conference of the PKD Foundation. So that's fantastic that you can tell people about. Actually, what are you going to tell people about? I'm wondering.
Well,
Or is it?
no,
Should we keep it?
and I appreciate you bringing that up right now. I'm really floored to be invited to be the keynote address speaker at the, as you said, the PKD conference happening the third week in June in Denver. It's where researchers and the community and members of the PKD Foundation come together to talk about the state of research, to help the community, as we talked about here, with education, with centers of excellence, with how you learn more about your disease, what you can do proactively. And so the keynote address, while certainly in the very early stages, is going to focus on 2 or 3 key topic areas. One is to tell my story, which I don't think is that different from the stories of many in our community. I think it's a relatable story. But where it gets a little bit different is the proactive nature of what I'm trying to do for my health and the very active involvement in supporting our community. Many people who have the disease are quiet about it. They're not proactively doing anything for themselves. And I'd say quite selfishly, not doing anything to help the rest of the community. People are reluctant to get involved in clinical trials, as an example. But if we who have PKD don't get involved in clinical trials, PKD will never get treated nor cured, because we're the ultimate to determine whether or not a potential treatment actually works in human population. I think if you have PKD, you have a responsibility to get involved in clinical trials. You also have a responsibility to do everything you can to extend the health of your kidney. And some of these lifestyle changes that we're talking about, some are, rather straightforward. Water intake, better rest and sleep, taking, kidney healthy supplements, taking Ketocitra, are things that the whole community should be doing. And many in the community don't do any of it. Just waiting, like their grandparents told them, wait for your kidneys to fail and then go on dialysis. So I want to encourage the community to get more proactive in the way they participate in helping the community and help themselves. And then I also want to encourage members of the community to raise money for all the good research that's going on in this area. We know from analogous diseases like cancer, which affects tens of millions of people, but there have been hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars invested around the world in therapies, treatments, cures for cancer. And we're making slow progress, but it's slow. It shows how difficult it is to come up with good treatments for diseases and how much money and effort is required. And so we want more people doing research into our disease, which requires more money, which requires us to both raise money on behalf of the foundation, get involved and raise money, but also advocate with our government and governments around the world to increase funding into this disease. There's a significant return on investment for governments if we can cure PKD and keep people off of dialysis. The ROI is incredibly high because the government spends hundreds of billions of dollars every year on providing, and this is for all kidney diseases, providing dialysis and other treatments for people on kidney disease. If we can cure these diseases, all of that treatment money goes away. It becomes available capital to do other things rather than, treating diseases. So coming up with treatments and cures to this disease is very important, and just want to encourage the community and the researchers who do research on behalf of our community to stay very actively involved and to stay motivated.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. And maybe just to further, also you mentioned these like very large sums of money, to treat cancer and so on. Absolutely right. But perspective-wise, of course, it's also important to keep in mind that to bring one drug to market costs on average $1.5 billion, whereas dietary interventions cost essentially zero. So just that's an interesting contrast there. So we were able to launch Santa Barbara Nutrients and Ketocitra with $1 million roughly to get to the stage where we are. So that's a million with a M as opposed to a billion with a B. So yes, maybe my very last question: where do you see the treatment and management of PKD? In the next or being in the next 5 to 10 years? I would say. What do you think?
Wow,
Crystal ball.
Yeah. I'm very optimistic, and I don't think I'm not being pragmatic in my optimism for this reason. Innovation in all areas, right? So we're not talking specifically about PKD now, but in all areas, innovation is accelerating at an accelerating pace. We see it with artificial intelligence as one and only one example, where between launching OpenAI launching ChatGPT 3 and 4 months later launching ChatGPT 4, there were orders of magnitude improvement. It was already great when it first launched, and ChatGPT 4 blew it away. And a couple of months from now, when 5 comes out, and 2 years from now, when GPT 10 comes out, what it can do, incredible. And that's just an example of the pace of innovation. We see it with renewable energy and the cost reductions. We see it with electric vehicles. We're seeing it now with targeted therapies and genomics, and the tools that are available to researchers to do massive scale research that wasn't available. We didn't really even understand the genome 15 years ago. And now you've got CRISPR technologies and other ways of attacking diseases. So I'm very, very hopeful that if we can buy time for our community, all of these advances will start to pay dividends on behalf of all disease research, but in particular PKD research. I traveled around the country. Thomas, you know this better than I do. I only got a small snapshot of the research that's going on. But some of the angles that are being approached on trying to treat and or cure PKD are really fascinating. And they're built on the foundation of research that's been done in other diseases that are a little bit more advanced than the research in the PKD, and really kind of compelling and interesting. And by the way, nothing would be better than to demonstrate that a simple dietary intervention, and I say simple because it's simple in its approach, it's complex in its biochemistry, but a simple approach like Ketocitra, right? Taking a supplement that has a number of active ingredients that together have a synergistic effect on slowing the growth rate of cysts. That would obviate the need for all of this really expensive stuff to happen. It would be great to demonstrate that this is, if not a very complementary piece of the puzzle, if not a silver bullet that in and of itself does it, it's a complementary piece to other things. And I really think we're on the cusp of really exciting treatments for the PKD community.
Excellent. I totally agree. That's a great closing word. Wonderful. Yeah. So I really enjoy having you on the board already of Santa Barbara Nutrients and working with you. And I think we're going to do great work together. I also look forward to your keynote address at the PKD conference and encourage anyone out there to tune in for that as well, which would be fantastic to have a really good full house there. Great. Glenn, thank you so much. Appreciate everything you do, and I'm actually really impressed by how many things you move forward. So fantastic. Thank you so
Thomas,
much, Glenn.
I love working with you and the board, and looking forward to all the things we'll accomplish going forward. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Glenn. Bye-bye.